Okay, I've been working a lot at Govan Old, and for the last couple of years, as the building works have started to get going, I've been back digging there. And so I want to take today to explain what I've been doing, and I'm hoping that all of you will find your way to Govan over the summer, and maybe some of you will come and work with me as well. So this is a very Govan focused talk, but it comes from an aspiration to make archaeology matter, make it socially meaningful. And that's something which I've been kind of working on since we launched the Scotland's archaeology strategy at the EAA in 2015, 11 years ago. And part of it was to really encourage greater engagement so that everybody can get involved in who this is. You can judge whether you think this has been effective. I've been very keen not to be confined to the university community, not confined to people who have an existing interest in archaeology, but to reach out to people who maybe didn't think that this was for them and to give them a chance. So the work at Govan, I've used this phrase, I've lifted this phrase, dig where you stand, from the Swedish historian, social historian, Sven Lindqvist, who was really interested in using history as a way of kind of building social consciousness. And so I've been inspired by that. I've been inspired by the work of various industrial archaeologists. John Hume has been he's been the chair of the Govan Heritage Trust for quite a while now, for about 10 years more maybe. And so his work is also kind of a benchmark here. And what we are trying to do is to create an opportunity for the community to participate in the excavations. And we wanted to do a couple of things. We wanted to kind of enhance and improve our understanding of the site chronology. And perhaps more importantly, we want to kind of chart the changing use of the church and the churchyard and how that has shifted over the years. And as you'll see, one of the ways we've tried to do this is to involve people both in the excavation, but also in the probing. And all these people who are kind of standing around in the field, in the graveyard, are actually probing for buried gravestones. So something I'll talk about a bit later. In terms of the context, we're in a kind of really dynamic moment. There's a lot of change happening. This is a photograph just as we were starting our excavations. We were working particularly in that angle by the west side door where we were going to be, where the new building is going, as I'll explain. But at the same time, the bridge here was being built, and that crane is putting in piles for the bridge, which was going to open in a couple of years after this photograph was taken. So we begin with the stones, and there's been a fair bit of work on the stones, which I'll be talking about. But I think the key point for me is, and this is something which comes up over and over, is that Govan has a kind of great deal of cultural capital which is bound up in these stones. And partly they're these ones that are pretty unusual and unique, the hogbacks and the sarcophagus. And these really are a kind of legacy which, until relatively recently, hadn't really been mobilized for the benefit of folk in the local community. So we're trying to change that situation. And if we think about what my early beginnings out here, one of the things which we were wanting to try to do, and what I felt was important to do, was to if you like, establish the integrity of the early medieval church, because the stones tell us that there's early medieval presence here, and the curvilinear churchyard also kind of is saying to us, gosh, this is an early Celtic site. But until my excavations, we didn't really know that the boundary was the authentic, historic, original boundary. And that seemed to me an important thing to establish, given all the redevelopment pressures which were evident by the 1990s. It was clear that things were shifting and that there were going to be more changes. So when this photograph was taken, this was done in the 1990s. You can see that the buildings to the bottom right of the church are just foundations. Well, those houses are very much built and occupied now. Oops. So I began there in 1994, and we were looking particularly. These are all trenches which were dug to explore the perimeter, and we established that there's a massive ditch outside the churchyard wall, and that the wall sits on the site of a bank, which would have been the actual original boundary. And none of this is visible on the surface. And I guess this would be one of the really big, important archaeological resources associated with the site, is actually outside the churchyard, immediately running around the boundary. And over the years, and this doesn't have all the most recent trenches, but this gives you a wee hint about where we've dug. And there's a couple phases of work here. And to be honest, I can't remember why some are blue and some are green, but I think the green ones are the ones which I led, and I think the blue ones were other people in Guard did them. So these are both the green ones, the earlier ones, and so they're kind of they're pretty small scale, as you can see. They're dotted around the churchyard. They're looking at the site of the manse unsuccessfully. And then the blue ones were done as a way of preparing for the new housing, and so to kind of explore that side of things. But it's really the stones we have to kind of keep in our mind. And this is just a diagram of all the ones that are inside the church. There are others known, as we'll see. And what's can be easily forgotten in all this is that this is a really, because we're so familiar with them, this is a really exceptional collection. There's nothing really like this, I would say, anywhere. There's nothing like this anywhere else in the British Isles. This kind of large collection of, such a large collection of Viking Age sculpture. And it's worth pointing out, this is by far the largest collection that's not in state care. So all these stones are owned by the Govan Heritage Trust. They came with the building when we took the building on. So this is a really important and resource, as I was saying. So how can we develop this, and why is it important? And it's important because it marks a kind of big cultural break, a big cultural transformation. There's a kind of sense in which the sculpture, because it's labeled Viking Age, is seen as being kind of created by Vikings, but really it's probably more useful to think of it as the Vikings created the circumstances which generated the sculpture. So there's not that much really Scandinavian artistic components in it, but those stones didn't appear until after the Scandinavian destruction of Dumbarton and the kind of which totally remade the political landscape. And that remaking the political landscape prompted this sculpture. And the stones that are most commonly kind of identified with the Vikings, the hogbacks, are in some sense meant to represent buildings. You know, the kind of the one common feature of these stones is they all have these little rectangular tiles on them, which are meant to be like roof shingles. But then we can debate as to whether they're meant to represent, you know, a great chieftain's hall, or are they meant to represent a kind of church building or a shrine? So the inset is from the Bayeux Tapestry, and we have these two shrines which are quite well, one of them is quite hogback looking, and you know the oaths are being taken on these things. So they're kind of, so we can choose, we can't really decide whether these things are meant to be buildings or what kind of building they're meant to represent. The stone which is just above the word Dookie, Wilhelmo Dookie, that one is the one that looks most like a casket to me, the way it's been shaped. So as probably most of you kind of have a sense of awareness of, these stones are, there's a discovery process behind these stones, and the sarcophagus really, the discovery of the sarcophagus in 1855 really kicks it off. And as we'll see, this is kind of had quite a big influence on things. And these images come from this from John Stewart's sculpted stone in Scotland. This is the first attempt to get all the early medieval sculpture in Scotland into one book. And it's a big book, but it doesn't, you know, there's lots of gaps. But the point is, this sarcophagus is such a sensation that it's here within a year of its discovery, which kind of tells us how excited people were by it. And also you have these nice little representations of these very cute little hogbacks. By the end of the 19th century, we start getting photographs, and this is from the Wiley collection in the University Library. And so here is the stones, you know, in their position in the graveyard before they've been, before people have started moving them around and kind of curating them, if you like. The curation is, I think, driven in many ways by the publication of this book by John Sterling Maxwell. And here, it's a very strange book if you've never looked at it. It's basically a photo album, and the photos are really fine, and they're made from plaster casts, so that they were cast and then taken into the studio so that the lighting could be well managed. And there's almost no text in it, but there is this amazing map which shows us where at the very end of the 19th century these stones were located. And clearly a number of the stones have been repositioned because the island that's on the main approach, that is a new feature from probably the 17th or 18th century. And that's not the original entranceway. So that they've been moved around, I think. And I always think that the kind of the current state of affairs at Govan really depends on, and you know, it was kicked off by Tom Davidson Kelly, who he's probably the kind of closest I've ever come to meeting a real live antiquarian. He was really interested in this old stuff, and he was interested in it partially because he's just a curious guy, but I think mainly because he saw it as, because of its uniqueness, as a way of helping to, well, to enhance the self-esteem of his parishioners, because he saw that that was a kind of a drag on their ability to cope with the post-industrial world. You know, this idea that everything's, you know, going downhill now, all these shipyards are closing, et cetera, et cetera. And he was wanting to say, well, you know, there was this other moment when government was really important, and there's nothing, can't take anything away from that. That this is a really distinguished era. Um, and so he kicks this off by having his conference, getting these proceedings together, but perhaps even more importantly, he begins the process of having guides there and kind of opening the building up to the public, and that he sets up the Friends of Govan Old, and the Friends of Govan Old really is part of in the direct lineage to the Govan Heritage Trust, which, as we'll see. So it's because of Tom that I got involved here, and that label on that slide is wrong. It should be 94 to 96. So I did a couple of digs, and you can see that they're pretty modest in the scale of things, but they were very effective. So they gave us, from the area immediately near to the church, 2 burials, which give us dates from the 5th or 6th century, pretty early for the west of Scotland. There's really nothing that's any earlier for a Christian site. And this gives you a sense of the ditches that it's outside. And again, we have radiocarbon date from this, from the 9th or 10th century, and that's from a kind of secondary fill. So it doesn't date the construction of the site, just that was just the earliest deposit which had charcoal in it. And I feel this is like one of these areas I every time I see this slide, I think, oh, I've really got to get back in there, because I didn't do any environmental work, and that's should happen. But that work kind of provides a chronology for us. So we have these very early burials, earlier than the first historic reference, which possibly is 756. There's disputes about that. And then we have these other structures within the churchyard from the 8th and 9th centuries, and then that ditch outside. So, and then just at the bottom, you'll see the dates. The Saint Constantine, the martyr, is he dies in 876. So the point about all this chronology is we can see that this is a going concern for several centuries before the kind of creation of this great royal cult center. And some of you may know that there was a bit of TV around this, and I have to say, at the time, I was a bit skeptical of the value of it, but over the piece, I can't tell you how many people who've come say, "Oh, I saw this on Time Team." Right? I've even had people come up to me and tell me that they'd seen Time Team and it was really good, and you know, had I seen it. So obviously I don't look like I used to, so I've been confused. And all this work, I feel, you know, so this is the Time Team stuff has been really valuable because it keeps giving in a way. It keeps drawing more attention to the project, and it's allowed. Some of it's been synthesized here, and this is. I feel that all of that first phase of work helped to inform a kind of archaeological strategy which could contribute to the urban regeneration there. At least that was my hope. And one of the things that got thrown up by this was a kind of the importance of this historic site, the Doomster Hill, which stood over by Water Row to the east of the church. The church is in the Roy's map is a kind of square just kind of at 11 o'clock to the to the red circle, and the in the engraving the church is hidden by the trees which are in the center of the picture. And the point about this monument is it was a really big conspicuous monument. It's probably given the name, according to Professor Clancy, that the name Govan itself probably comes from a British phrase meaning little hill, but it wasn't little. It was 150 feet in diameter and sort of, 50 meters across and 5 meters high, something like that. And this kind of was one way we've tried to represent it, with the idea that that kind of a heart or pear-shaped graveyard was originally drawn out like that because the pointy bit is where the original gateway was, and it was oriented on the site of the Doomster Hill. And this map, I would now say, is wrong, because where that green circle is, we've dug. So it's probably just in that direction, just a little bit kind of off the map. And certainly that sketch map here, the kind of reconstruction drawing has them far too close. So one of the things that has been going on really for the last 10 years or so has been something which we ended up calling the Govan Stones, which was a way of formalizing the work that Tom Davis and Kelly has been doing and presenting the stones and putting some interpretation up, improving the lighting, and improving access by organizing a very full schedule of opening with volunteers. And so all this was done, and we got good buy-in from Historic Scotland. Church of Scotland was very helpful. Heritage Lottery Fund was crucial, and professional colleagues have been really helpful just across the board. And just many of you probably were there and would remember those red carpet tiles, which used to grace the area around the sarcophagus, around the hogbacks. And we were able to draw upon Historic Scotland to help us reposition them. You can see the carpet tiles are gone, and they're being repositioned and put onto this cleaned up floor and given proper lighting. And these are really important group here. It's worth just emphasizing that there's no place where it has any bigger stones than these. This is the largest collection in Scotland. And in recent years, I've come to think of these things as a kind of as being quite reasonable to imagine these things as tombs of the kings of Strathclyde. I used to be more skeptical about it, but now I feel my appreciation of their uniqueness makes me think that, well, who else could be commissioning these things? And the fact that they're all so different really indicates that they are being commissioned over an extended period of time. So one of the big questions we've been trying to grapple with is who Constantine, whose enshrined here is. And we've settled, and this follows the work of historical colleagues John Reuben Davis and Gilbert Marcus. We've settled on Constantine I, who is the son of Kenneth MacAlpin, and who was regarded in the 10th century as a martyr. And I want to just point out a couple of things about Kenneth. Kenneth's offspring are pretty extraordinary. So two of his sons served as king, Constantine for 14 years, and then his brother. Kenneth also had a daughter whose name we don't know, who is married to Rune ap Arthgal, who is the king of Strathclyde. And he has another daughter whose name we do know, Maelmurra, who is married to she's married to actually two Irish high kings. So there's a very high dynastic connectivity here. So this drawing just kind of brings out just how extraordinary this monument is. There is nothing else like it. And this was intended to be a magnificent shrine for a royal saint. At least that would be our contention. And that this was made around the time that Constantine died in 876, because it's big enough to take a complete body. So they must have had the whole thing. Now, one of the things we've been doing, and I've had a really great student and now a colleague, Megan Caston, and she's done some really innovative work doing 3D recording and using digital methods. And so this I'll show you some of the benefits of it. I mean, one of the benefits of it is you get these fun videos, but this one's particularly good because you see how the stone has been modified, and some of the tegulation, some of the tiles have been trimmed off to allow them to make these really crummy legs. So they've kind of turned it into a creature. So that's something which, probably you could do with just standard photography. But what you can't do with standard photography is reconstruct the knotwork. So the stone on the left, she's scanned, and then she has figured out see all these weird little dimples which are left where the interlace intersects. She's looked at enough of this stuff that she can tell what the interlace is doing, and she does that by looking at well-preserved bits of interlace and then kind of artificially eroding it. And that's how she's kind of developed this ability to identify these different pits. And on the basis of that, she's able to reconstruct the knotwork pattern of these very beat up stones. And so the one on the right gives you a sense of that's kind of really what it gives you a much better sense of what the decorative scheme was like. So the recumbent tombstones are a really important and unique part of the package, and I think we have to think of them as being gravestones of the elite of the Kingdom of Strathclyde, whether these are princes or nobles or queens or bishops or whatever, or all of the above. Their presence is showing us how important people thought it was to be buried in the graveyard where the saints' relics were to be found. One of the really interesting things which we can do as a consequence of Megan having haven't been able to kind of analyze the stones to a much higher degree is we can start seeing correspondences between different groups of stones. And tentatively, we're seeing these groups which share particular traits, particular types of decoration, as perhaps representing family groups, so that they're kind of intentionally utilizing details which are distinctive to a particular group. That's just our, if you like, a working hypothesis. One that I think it's pretty hard to imagine how we could actually test the validity of that, but it's some ideas which come out of that work. As I say, we've tried to get our head around we even try to locate where the Doomster Hill is, and this is one of our attempts in 2007, where we end up all those kind of big lumps you see are bits of the old shipyard, which we couldn't move because they're concrete and steel, but we were digging where we had a good suspicion that the Doomster Hill was, and it's not there, and that's why we think it must be a little bit further to the east. But we did find kind of there is that kind of late medieval settlement in this area, so this is part of the community which is part of the church. And thinking and working on this monument made me think a bit more about its significance and about its importance as a kind of judicial center. So this is kind of quite an important, if you like, governmental responsibility that the kings of Strathclyde are taking on. And so this is their kind of main performance space. This is where justice is done, or something like this. It doesn't look like it was as elaborate as the Tynwald on the Isle of Man, but it just gives you a sense of there's many more than this, but just these are the ones which just for where we have clear stepping on the mounds. And this is giving you my current thinking about where the Doomster Hill was. So I think it's very close to where this piece of sculpture is by Matt Baker. And in the photograph, which has the partially completed new buildings at Water Row, that gap you see towards the horizon is looking straight at the churchyard, and it's looking right at that pointy bit of the church, and I think that's where the original entranceway is. So this is the most recent. This is a draft version of something which Historic Scotland's doing they're doing a guidebook on Vikings, and so they want to do something here. And I think this one gets the scale a lot better, and you get a sense of how big the thing is by those are meant to be people standing on top. So you could get a good good court case arrayed around that. You could get all your witnesses and supporters and everything all there. And on the far side of the river is where and we have no idea what it looked like, but that's the bit of Partick where the royal estate was on the north shore. So I've come to start thinking of Scotland as some kind of royal mausoleum, and I think it's clearly a kind of innovation in the sense of what's going on in Strathclyde, and I think it makes us think that we're looking, or kind of appreciate that we're looking at a brand new kingdom, and one which is fundamentally a British kingdom, but is clearly drawing on inspiration from both Pictish and Norse political worlds. So the Pictish connection we'll see as you see in all the representations of the riders, the mounted warriors, and the Norse is more restricted to some of the motifs found on the hogbacks and a couple of the choices in terms of interlaced patterns. And this is just this is a map which kind of shows you, it's kind of needs a few more dots on it, but it shows you where we know the sculpture is in this period. And so Govan has a lot of sculpture. There's nothing on the north side in Glasgow, but on the south side there's lots of stuff all out by Paisley, and in some ways Paisley seems like it's almost more the center of things in terms of where these crosses are found. And I've got a PhD student, David Bain, who's been working on this, and he's kind of mapping this stuff, so that there will be a new iteration of this. So the crosses you see, most of them are actually out in the country. They're not actually at churchyards, so they're kind of marking routes and they're marking boundaries. And then we have these ones which are where all the burials are. These ones are all the ones which have very strong royal associations. So Dumbarton, obviously, but Inchinnan was a royal endowment, as was, and Netherton is up at Hamilton. So there's a kind of royal strand running through this. And the key probably moment, if we're thinking about the kind of end of the era, is when the cathedral arrives. And I think it's fair to say that the assets and estates of the kingdom are more or less passed over to the bishop. So the bishop replaces the king as the great magnate in the area, and his diocese is, I think, largely reflects the extent of the kingdom of Strathclyde in the early 12th century. And this is really just to kind of make the point about how they're really not in the same place at all. There's a bit of there's a shift here. And my feeling about this was that this shift took place because as the new post, once the kingdom of Strathclyde ceases to be a going concern, the powers that be could not have the main church on the Clyde be a kind of reminder of the ancient dynasty. They needed a brand new place which was distinct, and I think that's what's going on with the cathedral. So it's a conscious shift. This map from the Borough Survey really just summarizes our understanding of where the settlement was. So the dark green areas around the church and the Water Row is the areas which we designated as being the most historically sensitive and needing good attention as if development came. And we also identified the site of Partick Castle on the other side. So I just put that up to kind of make the point of, at this moment, at the peak moment when the Govan Old is the main religious center for the kingdom, the royal focal point expands the river. So it's got these three elements to it. It's got the residence in Partick, it's got the judicial site on the Doomster Hill, and it's got the ecclesiastical site. And these things are all, if you like, part of these three elements are all part of that royal setup. And there's a nice um a nice view. You can see it on the right, some of the grids we use to map out and survey the burials, the gravestones in the churchyard. You can see the bridge um, not quite open in this photograph. And it's all changing, as you can see. So that bridge is, and other work that you've just been seeing kind of in the corners of these photographs, is telling us things are really shifting in Govan. And there's a kind of sense in which we need to think about the two periods of Govan's greatness, because it's not just that this is two more than most places have, but we have to find a way of kind of accommodating both of these things in terms of how we talk and think about the heritage of the place. And you know, it's really striking if you think about Govan up until the middle of the 19th century. It's still a pretty small, sleepy village. The painting by Simpson on the left, it has a steamship, so it's got a bit of modernity there, but it's still pretty underdeveloped. It's still pretty rural. And even 1882, there's not a lot going on around the churchyard. It's still just a kind of a convenient river crossing. So, and yet we can't get away from that. So there's that ancient quality to it, but there's also the fact that the building we have from 1888 is basically funded by shipyard money. So that the resources needed to build a church on that scale wouldn't have been available before the wealth that was being generated by all the shipbuilding activity in Govan. And some elements of the church, actually, like the chapel on the west side, are explicitly named after one of the shipyard families, the Stephen Chapel. But it's worth remembering that the Pierce Institute is given by the owners of Fairfield Shipyard, and the Pierce Institute is effectively the church hall and the church minister's office and everything. So the whole package is very much driven by or kind of sustained by the wealth of the shipbuilding. So I said one of the things we're interested in doing was trying to get our head around how things have changed. And we wanted to kind of, we realized that the disposition of the gravestones was a really important element of understanding that change, but also just the shape of the graveyard. And so if you, I've said a few times that the pointy bit in the bottom right, the southeast corner of the churchyard, is where I think the original entrance was. And in many ways, this is because the entrance that we have now with its little island is very peculiar, and it doesn't make any sense until after the Reformation, when the orientation of the church would have been shifted. So the whole layout is as we have it now, is a post-Reformation layout. And this gives you a hint of how many graves there are. So there's, this one, there's top number is something 320 or something, 330. So that's what was known in the early 90s. I'm sure there was loads more because, well, there was. So what we wanted to do was to try to recover everything that had been grown over, and to understand how that had happened. And the way we've done it is we've gridded out the whole churchyard. I'll show you the grid in a minute. And if you can see these T-shaped probes, we just poke into the ground. Everything we're doing is really in the top 300 millimeters because the whole site is a scheduled ancient monument. So really only dealing with that kind of superficial layer. We're not really doing any excavation. We're just trying to expose the buried stones and record them. And so here we've just got people really love doing this, I have to say. Get a lot of fun out of it. And I think it's partially because they find it's the finding things is really good, important. And a kind of element of what we're doing is trying to clarify what's in the churchyard. And one of the kind of urban myths that we're dealing with relates to the demolition of Harlan and Wolff, where, as you can see, some of the rubble has fallen from the demolition has fallen into the churchyard. And in that area, there had been some of the early stones were stored against the wall. And time Tom Davis and Kelly got there, they were all gone. And so the presumption was that they'd been scooped up when they tidied up this stuff. And so one of the things we've been doing was to see if that was actually the case. And it turns out it's not the case. It turns out that the stones are there. They've just gotten buried over years of neglect. And this is a fun day working with Mark McGeeton, who went on to do archaeology at St. Andrews. So I think he might be graduating this year. Amazing. So I think the search for the buried gravestones is really useful because it's one of these things which is quite easy to work with. It's quite easy to involve volunteers with. They always find stuff. So it means that it's a very fulfilling experience. And it's contributing to our improving our knowledge. So there's a kind of sense of satisfaction, not just the fun of discovery, but the actual sense that you're making a difference. We're in a really happy position of having this ridiculously detailed plan, which was done in 1936 by one of the parishioners. And I've never been able to figure out who Mr. Cahoon was and how he knew so much about who all these people were, because many of the gravestones are linked to not just names, but people's professions as well. So I would say there's two things about this that I would point out. One is where we've been able to test this, it's proved to be very accurate. And the other thing is, if you see all the little squares at the corners of the different burial layers, these are little stone markers, which in every case, they've all been either knocked over or broken, as you'll see. So this is our survey. This is where we got to last year. So each of these squares has been probed, and we've mapped all the stones that were there, and then either left them exposed and cleaned up if they were close to the surface, or if they were a bit deeper and going to be a hazard, we've reburied them. So my view is that all this probing is going to allow us to make some really important decisions in the coming years about how to restore and turn the churchyard into a more pleasant place. And it's already become a kind of local amenity, but I think we can build on that. And it would be really good to know where all the stones are before we decide where we want to put our picnic benches and so on. Here are some of the stones. These are some of the stones that are very close to the entranceway, and there's a number of them which are grouped together who are associated with this family, the Rowans. Rowan is a really big local landowner, and they have some of the stones are really quite remarkable. The names, the spelling of the names doesn't stay put, you know. Um, there's you can see that evolution. So we have 17th, 16th, 17th, 18th century recumbent stones, some of which are kind of verbose, you might say. Other ones are a bit, bit more restrained. Anyway, these are now visible, and I think are a really nice asset to the churchyard, and that would be one of the things to figure out how best to keep them clean and looking good and looking legible. Now, it's not just about the practicalities of, if you like, managing the graveyard as a public space, but it's also about making sure we appreciate all the stories there. And one of the things which I've been involved with in recent years was a study for Historic Scotland about influence of slavery and how this kind of influences the, if you like, the built environment of the 18th and 19th centuries. And as you'll be well aware, it's everywhere. And the Rowans are associated with all of these houses, and none of which survive. Although the place names, Broomload Road and all this, they're Bellahouston Park and so on. But so the Rowans had these, you know, string of important buildings in the neighborhood. And so kind of linking them with some of these buildings and kind of the wider heritage narrative is one of the things we're trying to do. And it's not me particularly, but several of the volunteers who are part of the Govan Stones team have taken a really keen interest in the genealogical side of this, and there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out. And you can see that some of these monuments require quite a lot of work to extract the carvings because they're so eroded. And this is one of the areas where the digital survey will be important, this kind of 3D modeling. So for instance, you can see there's a shield with a saltire on it, but unless you have water on it and the light in just the right way, you'll never see it. So we need to kind of find a way of capturing that using 3D magic. And that whole interest in trying to get our heads around the, if you like, the legacy of slavery and what the people who were, you know, within the kind of grand burials in Govan Old, one of the things we're coming across is it's possible to kind of make that very clear. And so the mayors of Plantation, who are the principal monument is the column within the iron cage. They're obviously have got Jamaican connections, and their house, kind of the name of their house says it all, really. So this is just that part of the graveyard again, and you can see the drawing on the left. That's what we would be doing for each of these 5-meter squares. There's not actually that many of these stone layer markers which are drawn on the left within the graveyard, but we're just grabbing everything that we come across. And as you see, these things once they're cleaned up and the lighting's okay, they're pretty remarkable, these recumbent gravestones. And one of the things about many of these is these are table stones, and you'll say, where are the legs? This is another table stone. This would be one of the ones that's just a little bit too deep to leave exposed, sadly. But the legs have been taken off, and on the left-hand side, this is a gravestone to somebody who was a maltster, and you can see there's a big shovel on his recumbent stones, and the legs are over to the right. So the legs have been taken off, and the stone dropped down. And we think this is happening in the 1950s, 40s or 50s, and when the graveyard seems to have been, the Glasgow City Council seems to have taken some steps to make it easier for them to manage. The other one has a little bit of graffiti on it. It says Mike. And I just put it in there to point out that we have very little evidence of vandalism on any of our monuments, which is there's a lot of broken and chipped up ones, but we don't have much conspicuous, damage. And it's just quite a nice example of one of these memento moris. And this is one of these stones which has been deliberately slighted by the council. So it's been tipped over and put into a hole, which has been good. The swags are incredibly well preserved, partially because of that. And here's another one of those. And this one I particularly like because of the diction. It's got a lot of Scots in it. Weird spellings. December with an S, and so on. But it's also really interesting to look at it. So the date on the stone is 1708, and at some point it snapped off and it was re-erected, and the bottom bit of the inscription was underground. And so when they started burning coal on a big level, that bottom bit was protected from the soot. So that's quite a graphic illustration of how well the consequences of burning fossil fuels. People are breathing that. So this is another one of the stones against the side wall, which had just gotten lost and forgotten about, and we spent a bit of time and effort to liberate it from underneath this tree. And so this is one of the stones that was recorded in that Sterling Maxwell book, and then had been thought to be lost, and here it is again. And we've also started to be able to pick up stones which weren't in Sterling Maxwell, like this one, which we can see from that faint pitting on it, which isn't come across particularly well here, and the form of it, that it is another one of the recumbent stones. It's just really, really worn. So we're kind of adding to the corpus of this. Every year we're kind of just contributing more of that. The area we've been digging in the last few years in the southeast corner is an area which I originally looked at in the early 90s or the mid 90s. And you can see on the right-hand side this gravel surface with the ranging rods everywhere. That road had a layer of charcoal in it, which produced that 8th, 9th century date. And that is a really hard-packed gravel road. And I think that is the main entranceway into the churchyard. And if you look at the photograph on the right, the deep part, that trench from the 1990s, is re-excavated there with where the two people with dark blue t-shirts are working, and it's where the deeper bit of the trench where the chap in the high vis is standing. And you'll see there's a square building which is a very prominent feature of this part of the site. And this is a building which we think was built after discovery of the sarcophagus. The account of its discovery is not very detailed, so we think it's in this. We know it's in this part of the churchyard, but it's very vague. But we think we may have. We're getting closer to understanding that. We know that in the late 19th and early 20th century, a lot of the stones were collected, and they were put in an area and displayed here, gravel and kind of little fencing. And if you look at the drawing on the right, there's two little brown buildings in the corner, and the larger of the two is a stone building. The other one is a wee shed, which we really struggled to find any trace of, but the larger is there, and that's what it looks like from the top. And we think that this was a shelter which was constructed after the sarcophagus was discovered, because they needed a place to put it, and they either didn't want to bring it into the church, or there just physically wasn't space for it in the church, because there was the congregation would have been growing, and the church was becoming inadequate because of that. So this is just giving you a kind of another a kind of bit more detail of it doesn't look all that impressive, this road, but it is a very hard surface and very substantial, and those kind of irregular cobbly things are part of the makeup. We haven't lost. It isn't like there was a layer of them. They were kind of in pockets and patches. So it's not a uniform kind of Roman road or road in Iona kind of arrangement, sadly. Last year, one of the things we discovered was that, and this is one of the things, you just don't remember things so well, but I had forgotten that the time team, when they came, they had a JCB driver who was over enthusiastic, and you can see that big scoop. It's very clear on the right-hand photograph between where Rob and the black and the wheelbarrow are standing. The way the ground curves up there, that is the scoop of the JCB blade, and the JCB driver had kind of dug right through all the archaeology before I could stop him. So I can remember, it was only when we had this exposed, I remember how annoyed I was at the guy, and at myself for not having kept a closer eye on him. So this is kind of where we got to at the end of last year. We haven't really grappled with the road, but you can see within the interior of the square building, we've come down to a very pale yellow clay, which is the kind of subsoil. And on the right-hand side, there's a very distinct post hole. So I think that is maybe part of the gateway entrance arrangement. So this coming year, we're going to be excavating the rest of that square, and also going back to kind of peel apart the road and hopefully get a better understanding of what the arrangements around the gate and so on were. I would also point out to the towards the bottom of the photograph, as you're coming to the edge of back into the graveyard, you can see all these graves, which are kind of almost like edging closer and closer to the square building. And particularly on the left, you can see the graves are showing up really clearly, because they've cut into the clay, and the clay has been redeposited and stands out quite clearly from the background. These are all 19th century graves, and when we would find the coffin fittings, we would just stop, so we wouldn't have to deal with these modern burials. And possibly the most exciting thing about this is, I don't know if you can see in the section there's that very dark, deep cut on the left-hand side. We think this is where the sarcophagus was, and we can't be sure, but we're going to dig the other half of this, and hopefully be able to resolve that. And we do have a certain amount of artifacts from this, which are all consistent with the mid 19th century. But I think we're going to cross our fingers that we're going to get more decisive information from this coming season here. And as I said, there's lots of graves. And you can see the kind of the mottled soil is really is kind of bringing those graves out very clearly. In addition to the structures and the kind of this gravestones I've already talked about, we've also found some other pieces of sculpture. This is the best one. This is particularly exciting because this is probably the earliest piece of sculpture we have here. It's incised. It's not in the same style as if you like the Govan the Govan School material, and this comes out of one of the trench that was dug with the JCB back in 1996. And so because it was dug by a machine, it was dug and backfilled by a machine. We never saw this the first time round. So we're really lucky to have found it the second time round, and we'll be even luckier if we find the rest of it and find out what his head looked like and so on. And one of the most surprising discoveries to me was that within a generation or so, some of the stones just were not. Obviously we've showed you the ones which gotten buried on the grass, but in the large photograph, just in front of the bucket, you'll see there's a kind of clutch of stones, and this is part of a drain, a kind of soak-away drain, and you can see all the stone from that soak-away, which is kind of spread out on the grass. But within it are two fragments of one of the Sterling Maxwell crosses fragments. So they'd decided that they didn't really like the stone much after all, and they've just dumped it in here. And it's kind of astonishing that could happen anyway. So this is just a detail of the early medieval levels and a kind of a wee shot at this our big post hole, and that stone which is sticking out is a massive piece of quartz which is used to stabilize whatever post was in there. So I guess one of the dark days for us was in 2007 when they decided to shut the church. But that has been good in some respects because it has allowed a kind of funding to be directed at it, which the church wouldn't have been able to get access to. And we've been very fortunate in Govan that there's this group called the Govan Workspace, which is a community-based charity, which has been a very energetic champion of conservation matters, not just in Govan Old, but across Govan. But naturally, when the church became vacant, they were the people who stepped in and said, right, we can't let this shut. We have to keep this thing going. How can we keep it going? And so they they have a very successful record of kind of looking after the buildings and restoring buildings, most conspicuously, obviously, at Fairfield. But they conducted a study. How can we transform this? How can we make it more suitable? How can we use it as a way of kind of stimulating more regeneration. That's all, what are going to be the community benefits that could be achieved from reimagining the church. That was really where we were coming from. And it was our view that we didn't want just a museum, but we wanted a place that was going to be dynamic and was going to have more stimulus and get people coming to it regularly, a bit like a church, so make it a place that people come to consistently. And you'll see that I have no qualms about exploiting my children here. This is my youngest as a poster girl. But we've been thinking a lot about a trust was set up, the Govan Heritage Trust. This is part of Govan Workspace, really, but it has a separate charitable status that made it easier to take the building on. And we've been thinking about all kinds of things, not just the tourism, what can we do to keep worship going on here, but how can we use it as a kind of civic space for art, for music, for educational things. And we have so we initially did our studies and redisplayed the stones, and then we thought we'll get going with the building work. And around the time the building work was getting going, this building was being made. But before we got to it, this building was being made. So we started originally thinking about how can we tap into this opportunity, and that having the ferry was a really important way of getting more visitors in. And so that took a lot of our energy, but showing these kind of numbers, 30,000 passengers a year, helped to make the case for the value of a bridge. And we always saw this as future of Govan would be greatly enhanced if there was easy access across the river here. And so we've been championing that. And we also wanted to kind of reclaim the riverside. So we got about £800,000 to restore the walkway here. And so we did that before we really did any of the building work, because we weren't in a position to do the building work, but we wanted to make it easier and more attractive for people to come in here. And that has had a great benefit in terms of reducing the antisocial behavior, which used to be an issue in the churchyard. So obviously things are really kind of shifting. There's a big change of perspective happening. All this finally filling in the Water Row new housing, and it's all shiny. It's pretty nice, and the bridge obviously makes a huge difference. It's kind of greatly increased our visitor numbers. And finally, we are at the point where we're actually able to do some of the building work, which we've identified as being essential to allow the building to function as a kind of public venue. Basically, we needed disabled access, we needed toilets. And so to do that, we had this building designed, which sits at the west side where there was originally intended to be a spire. And so we've kind of designed it in such a way that it's acceptable to the Planning Authority and to Historic Scotland, because this is an A-listed building, so it has to be acceptable. So we've done the walkways and stuff like that, and the key thing we are trying to do is to get this new structure built, and the architects really want to put a tower there, and we couldn't afford one, so we're not having a tower. But the photograph in the middle, I don't know if you can see, the steel work is going up now. So that photograph is from earlier it was last month. But anyway, so the framework is now in place, and so the next phase of work will begin in May to actually start building the building. So we're really excited about this, because it means that by the end of by 2027, we will have this new building, we will have disabled access, we'll have toilets. We can start doing a lot more stuff. And we also think we'll be able to open all year round because we've installed a water source heat pump drawing on from the Clyde. So this is just being commissioned now. So we don't know how effective it is. We've got our fingers crossed. And part of the kind of preparations for that involved taking down this boundary wall to the west. And we just exposed this amazing midden of 19th, early 20th century stuff, which was just tumbling into our trench. And for me, the kind of star feature is this teapot, which had a teacup in it and a wedding ring. So somebody was obviously clearing house and just flung it into the midden and didn't realize that Granny's wedding ring was in there. Anyway, this is all really revealing about the people who would have been attending church when this building was new. And I think more and more about the idea of a congregation. I feel that's what we really need to be thinking about as we're going forward. We need to kind of reconstruct the congregation because that is what looks after the building. It's not just the kind of a few people. It needs to have a kind of large community of people who have a kind of commitment. And so we're thinking about how we can draw people in to participate in both, recovering it through the archaeology, through the kind of presenting it to people and giving people a sense of responsibility and ownership. So one of the things we're doing is working up a new set of guides with our team, which are mostly volunteers. So we've got finally have something like a leaflet to tell you what some of the interesting stones are about in the graveyard. And we're just constantly thinking about how we can use this as an educational resource for kids of all ages. And some of you will know about a film, but this is a really effective way. It really kind of opened my eyes to how just exposure to the monuments really changes kids' perception. And I think it'd be really interesting to go back and speak to these kids again, because this film's about 10 years old now. They're grown-ups. And obviously there's a huge kind of appetite for Vikings and all this kind of stuff. And so we never have a shortage. Whenever we run these kind of events, we always are inundated with the number of people who are coming to see this, even though this isn't us particularly, but the providing a venue and providing that kind of, if you like, authentic historical backdrop, it seems to be a very valuable asset. So to me, the archaeology really is a great way to reach out to people, whether you're talking about what you've been doing or actually letting people kind of get their hands dirty. And I would say we're at a kind of creative moment. We have to decide what we can do in the church, what is going to be the future of it. We haven't settled on the kinds of things we can do and should do. So we're really thinking about what educational and regeneration purposes we can put the church to. And they talk about the Govan School of Sculpture, but in a way, it would be nice to think about there being a new Govan School, and one which maybe really draws out both the kind of historical, artistic side of things, but also is about how you deploy that to promote and encourage regeneration. So we've done a certain amount of artistic things, and there's more stuff scheduled for the coming year. We're kind of pushing the boat out in various ways. We really want to make this a kind of central place, so that this is why when we recovered this great mural that used to be in the Iona community place down in the Broomielaw, we made a big song and dance of it, because we like the idea of Govan Old as a kind of focal point for art and culture and tradition. So we've had lots of volunteers, and you can see everybody's happy, and they're some of the same and some of them different. And this year we've already started. We're out there just after Easter starting our probing. We've got weekend excavations planned for May, June, July, probably August, and then we're going to do a big program of excavation in September. My hope is that that will let us complete all the excavations in the southeast and be, if not complete the probing survey, at least get it quite close to being complete. So if you're interested, you can sign up for that on the Govan Stones website. Govan Stones, you can find out how to sign up there.